Betrayal is not just a single moment of weakness. It's a slow, creeping process. It seeps into the cracks of a marriage, unnoticed at first, until one day, the foundation is too weak to hold. I know this because I betrayed the best person in my life, and I have regretted it every single day for 35 years. Youth and love. I was young. We were both young. When I married at 18, I was certain it would be forever. My wife, Anna, was my first love, my only love. She had this way of making life feel lighter, brighter. She was one of those people who could walk into a room and draw every eye, not because she demanded attention, but because she radiated something magnetic. She could strike up a conversation with a stranger and, within minutes, make them feel as if they'd known her forever. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one, the observer, the type who struggled to speak in a room full of people, who preferred the comfort of solitude. But with Anna, I never felt small or inadequate. She made me feel whole, like I was enough. I still remember the way she looked on our wedding day. She was breathtaking, not just in the way she looked, but in the way she felt. The joy that poured out of her, the excitement, the absolute certainty in her eyes when she said, "I do." I believed in us. And for years we were happy. By the time we were 25, we had 2 children, a boy and a girl. Our life was simple but good. I worked a steady job while Anna stayed home to raise our kids. Every evening, I would come home to find her waiting for me. A warm meal on the table, our children giggling as she played with them. Some nights, she would pull me into an impromptu dance in the kitchen, twirling around barefoot, laughing, just because she could. I thought it would always be like that. I thought nothing could change us. But I was wrong. The shift. Anna had always been ambitious, but she never let it overshadow our family, until the day she decided to go back to work. At first, I told myself I was happy for her. She was brilliant, and she deserved to chase her dreams. But when she got a new job at a prestigious firm, everything changed. She was suddenly busier, stressed. She worked long hours, sometimes late into the night. She stopped waiting at the door when I came home. Some nights, I would eat dinner alone, reheating something she had made earlier, if she had made anything at all. I told myself it was temporary. But as the months passed, I started to feel something I had never felt before. Resentment. I never said anything. I should have, but I didn't. Instead, I let it fester. I convinced myself that she was the one who was pulling away, that she was the one who was changing, that she didn't need me anymore. The truth? I was the one pulling away. I just didn't see it yet. The beginning of the end. I met her at a company event. The woman who would become my affair partner. She wasn't extraordinary, not particularly kind or interesting. She was just there, and she gave me attention. I was weak. First, it was innocent. Casual conversations, compliments, flirtation. I told myself it meant nothing, but deep down I knew exactly where it was heading, and I didn't stop it. For weeks we talked, sometimes over the phone, sometimes in person. It was intoxicating in a way my marriage hadn't been in years. I felt seen, desired. One night, my wife came home late from work. She looked exhausted, barely meeting my eyes as she walked past me to our bedroom. And I remember thinking, she doesn't even see me anymore. That night, I kissed another woman. And the next night, I slept with her. The goodbye that should never have happened. 2 weeks later, I wrote my wife a birthday card. I told her how much I loved her, how lucky I was to have her, how she was the best thing that had ever happened to me. And 2 weeks after that, I walked out. I packed my bags and stood in front of her, saying words I can barely remember now, except for how they made her look at me, like she didn't even know who I was anymore. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just stood there, silent tears streaming down her face, as I carried my suitcase out of the home we built together. I will never forget that moment. I wish she had yelled at me, called me a bastard, anything. But the silence is what has haunted me for 35 years. The night I left my wife, I expected a sense of relief. I had convinced myself that I was escaping something, that I was reclaiming my happiness, my freedom. But as I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, listening to the distant sound of my children playing inside the house I had just walked out of. All I felt was an unbearable weight pressing down on my chest. I had made my choice, and there was no turning back. The days after, I moved in with my affair partner. It wasn't planned that way, it just happened. I told myself it was temporary, that I just needed a place to stay while I figured things out. But deep down, I think I wanted to convince myself that leaving Anna had been the right decision. That I had chosen this new life, this new woman, for a reason. First, it was exciting, thrilling even. There were no responsibilities. No crying children to wake up for in the middle of the night. No school lunches to pack. No arguments over bills or schedules. Just two adults living in the moment. But the moment didn't last. The first cracks. 2 weeks after I left, I saw Anna again. I had come to pick up the kids for a scheduled visit. I knocked on the door, expecting the same quiet, broken woman I had left behind. Instead, she looked different. Not in a dramatic way. Her hair was still the same. She was still wearing one of those old sweaters she always loved. But there was something in her eyes. A dullness. I realized then that I had done more than just betray her. I had damaged her. And when our children ran up to me, excited and oblivious, Anna stepped back into the house and closed the door without a word. That was the first time I felt it. The regret. It settled in my stomach like a stone, heavy and unmoving. Life without her. First, I tried to ignore it. I threw myself into my new life, into the arms of the woman I had left everything for. We went out late. We laughed. We drank too much. But something was missing. It wasn't love. It wasn't even happiness. It was purpose. I hadn't realized until it was gone how much I had relied on Anna. Not just as a wife, but as the person who gave my life meaning. The one who made sure the bills were paid on time. The one who reminded me to call my parents. The one who planned the birthday parties. Who knew all of our children's favorite foods. Who remembered every little detail about our lives. Without her, everything felt hollow. And slowly, my affair partner began to notice. She would catch me staring at my phone, reading old text messages from Anna that I couldn't bring myself to delete. She would see the way I hesitated before walking into our apartment, as if I were waiting for someone to stop me. She knew. And one night, after a particularly meaningless evening spent drinking too much wine, she looked at me and said, "You still love her, don't you?" I didn't answer, because I didn't need to. The breaking point. 2 months after I left, the affair ended. She was the one who walked away first. "I can't be with someone who's still living in the past," she had said. "And let's be honest, you're not exactly a catch right now." And she was right. I wasn't the man she thought she was getting. I wasn't the confident, independent man who had swept her into an exciting, forbidden romance. I was just a broken husband who had made the worst mistake of his life. And now I was alone. Alone in an apartment that didn't feel like home. Alone in a life I had chosen but didn't want. The only thing I had left were my children. But even that was slipping away. Anna's strength. I don't know what I expected when I saw Anna months later. Maybe I thought she would still be grieving. That she would still be broken. That some part of her would still be waiting for me. But she wasn't. She had rebuilt herself. She was stronger. She had found a new job. She had a new rhythm, a new sense of independence. She was smiling again. Not the forced, fragile smile she had given me in those first weeks, but a real one. And I hated it. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because I knew that I could never undo what I had done. I had lost her, and I would never get her back. The regret that never fades. The years passed, but the regret never left me. I watched as Anna moved on. I watched as she met someone new. Someone who treated her the way I should have. I watched as my children grew up, as they started calling another man dad when I wasn't around. And I had no one to blame but myself. 30 years later, I sat alone on what should have been our 42nd wedding anniversary, thinking of the life we should have had, thinking of the love I threw away, and knowing that some mistakes can never be undone. They say time heals all wounds. That's a lie. Time doesn't heal. It only forces you to live with the choices you've made. Some wounds never close. They just become a part of you, a constant reminder of everything you lost. For the first few months after I left Anna, I convinced myself that life would get better, that I would adjust, that this new life I had chosen would eventually feel like mine. But instead, everything I had built, everything I had destroyed my marriage for, began to fall apart. And I had no one to blame but myself. The divorce papers. It was 6 months after I left when the papers arrived. I had told myself I would be the one to file, that I would make it official when I was ready. But Anna, she didn't wait. I remember the day I got the envelope. I sat in my small apartment, staring at my name printed in black ink on the front, my hands shaking as I opened it. I don't know why it hit me so hard. I was the one who left. I was the one who ruined us. But seeing it in writing, seeing proof that she was finally cutting me out of her life, felt like a punch to the gut. I hadn't realized until that moment that some part of me had been holding on. That even after everything I had done, I had assumed she would wait for me. But she didn't. She was ready to move on. And she wasn't looking back. The kids started noticing. At first, our children were too young to understand. They still greeted me with the same wide-eyed excitement every other Saturday when I picked them up. They still threw their arms around me like nothing had changed. But children grow up, and they start to notice things. I remember the first time my son, Daniel, asked me why I didn't live with them anymore. He was only 6. "Did Mommy make you leave?" he asked, his voice small, uncertain. I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell him something simple, something easy, something that wouldn't make him question who I was. But before I could say anything, my daughter, Sophie, just shook her head. "It wasn't Mommy," she said quietly, and that was it. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just knew. And somehow that was worse. Loneliness hits differently at night. Nights were the worst. During the day, I could distract myself with work, with errands, with the occasional forced conversation with my coworkers. But at night, there was nothing to drown out the silence. I thought about Anna constantly, about the way she used to hum under her breath while she folded laundry, about the way she would put her cold feet against my legs under the blankets just to make me jump, about the way she looked at me on our wedding day, eyes filled with trust, with love, with forever. I had ruined forever. And for what? For something that didn't even last 6 months? Watching her move on. I didn't expect her to meet someone else so quickly, but of course she did. Anna was beautiful, not just in the way she looked, but in the way she was. She had this presence, this warmth, this kindness that made people want to be around her. So when I heard from a mutual friend that she had started dating again, I wasn't surprised. I was just angry, not at her, not at the man she was seeing, at myself, because I had no right to feel jealous. No right to feel possessive. No right to feel like she still belonged to me, because she didn't. I had let go of her the moment I walked out that door. I just didn't realize that meant she would let go of me too. I tried to win her back. A year after I left, I made one last mistake. I told myself it wasn't too late. That maybe, just maybe, if I apologized, if I told her the truth, if I begged, she would take me back. I showed up at her house unannounced. She opened the door, surprised but not unkind. "Hey," she said, like I was an old acquaintance, not the man she had once promised forever to, and that broke me. I wanted to fall to my knees. I wanted to tell her I had been wrong, that I had been selfish, that I still loved her, that I never stopped. But all I said was, "Can we talk?" She hesitated. Then she stepped aside. I walked inside the house that used to be ours. Smelled the same. It looked the same. But it wasn't mine anymore. Anna sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where we had shared so many late-night talks, so many quiet mornings. "I miss you," I admitted. She exhaled slowly, looking down at the table. "You miss what we had." "No," I said quickly. "I miss you." She shook her head. "You don't get to do this," she whispered. "Do what?" "Come back. Pretend like you didn't break me. Pretend like we can just erase everything and go back to the way it was." "But She looked up then, and I saw it in her eyes. The love she once had for me, It was gone, replaced by something else. Not hate, not anger, just tiredness. You made your choice, she said softly. You don't get to change your mind just because you regret it now. I opened my mouth to argue, to fight, but she shook her head. I fought for you, she said. I begged you to stay, and you walked away. I won't do that again. I knew then that I had lost her forever, and when I finally left her house that night, I didn't just leave as the man who had betrayed her. I left as a stranger. The last time I saw her, 2 weeks before her wedding, I told her I still loved her. She just looked at me and said, "Then you should have fought for me, because I would have loved you forever if you had let me." I sat outside the church on the day of her wedding, staring at the doors, telling myself I would object, that I would run inside, that I would take her back before it was too late. But I didn't, because it had already been too late for a long, long time. A lifetime of regret. That was 30 years ago. I never remarried. Not because I couldn't, but because I never loved anyone the way I loved her. And today, as I sit alone, staring at the calendar, I realize what today is. It would have been our 42nd wedding anniversary. But instead, it's just another reminder that some mistakes can never be undone. And some regrets never fade. They say regret fades with time. That eventually you learn to move on. They're wrong. Regret isn't something that disappears. It's something you carry. A weight on your back, a whisper in your ear, a shadow in every moment of silence. I have lived with my regret for 35 years. And in some ways, I think I deserve it. The years that followed. After Anna got remarried, my life became routine, empty. I worked. I came home to an apartment that never felt like home. I saw my children every other weekend. I convinced myself that was enough. It wasn't. The first time I saw my kids with Mark, Anna's new husband, I felt something I had never felt before. Not just jealousy, fear. Fear that he would become the father I should have been. Fear that one day my children would stop needing me altogether. And in a way, they did. It didn't happen all at once. At first, they still ran to me when I picked them up. Still called me when they had nightmares. Still looked at me the way sons and daughters look at their fathers. But as the years passed, that changed. Slowly, quietly. I didn't see it until it was too late. The distance between us. It started with the small things. Missed phone calls. Texts that took hours, sometimes days, to be answered. "Sorry, Dad. I was busy." And then, eventually, those texts stopped coming altogether. By the time my son turned 16, he was calling Mark for advice instead of me. By the time my daughter got accepted into college, I wasn't the first person she told. I had no one to blame but myself. I had given up my family for something fleeting. And in the end, that fleeting thing had vanished, leaving me with nothing. And the worst part? No one had taken my children from me. I had lost them. The conversation that broke me. The last time I saw Anna before she moved away was at our son's wedding. By then, she and Mark had been married for over 20 years. They had built a life together, one that I was no longer part of. At the reception, she approached me. She still looked beautiful. Time had added a few wrinkles, a few strands of silver in her dark hair, but she was still her, and I still loved her. "How are you, David?" she asked. I wanted to lie, to say I was happy, that life had been good to me, but I couldn't. Instead, I gave her a sad smile. "I'm all right." She studied me for a moment, her expression unreadable. And then, softly, she said something I will never forget. "You know, I used to think that you were the one who ruined my life." I swallowed hard. "I know." She gave a small, wistful smile. "But I was wrong." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. Then she sighed. "You ruined your own life, David." And then, just like that, she walked away, leaving me standing there, realizing she was right. A lifetime of regret. That was years ago. I don't hear from my kids much anymore. Not because they hate me, but because they don't need me. I became a visitor in their lives, an afterthought, and I have no one to blame but myself. Tonight, I sit alone in my apartment, staring at an old photo of Anna and me. It was taken on our honeymoon. She was laughing, looking at me like I was the only man in the world. I wish I had known then what I know now. I wish I had fought for her, because I would have loved her forever. And, deep down, I know she would have loved me forever too. If only I had let her. Regret is a peculiar thing. It doesn't come all at once, like a crashing wave. It creeps in quietly, like a slow-moving tide, inching further and further until you look down and realize you're drowning. I didn't fully understand the weight of my choices until years later. Until I was truly alone. Until there was nothing left but the ghost of what could have been. A life half-lived. I never remarried. It wasn't because I didn't have the opportunity. There were women who came and went, fleeting romances that never amounted to anything more than distractions. But none of them were her. None of them laughed the way Anna did. None of them had her fire, her warmth, her way of making me feel like I belonged. So, in the end, I chose solitude. Or maybe solitude chose me. I poured myself into work, climbed the corporate ladder, earned promotions, bought a nicer apartment, filled my time with meaningless tasks. From the outside, I'm sure it looked like I had rebuilt my life. But at night, when the world was quiet, I felt the emptiness creeping in. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how different things could have been if I had just stayed, if I had just fought. But that's the thing about regret, it doesn't change the past. It just makes the present unbearable. Watching from a distance. Anna and I never became friends after the divorce. She was always civil, always polite, but there was a distance between us that never faded. And maybe that was for the best. I told myself I wanted her to be happy, that I wanted her to move on. But deep down, I hated knowing that another man had stepped into the role I was supposed to fill. Mark was a good man. I knew that much. He treated Anna well, gave my children the stability I had taken from them. And in the end, they loved him for it. I remember the day my daughter, Sophie, accidentally called him Dad in front of me. She immediately covered her mouth, eyes wide with guilt. I didn't mean, but I just forced a smile. It's okay, I said, and it was. Because Mark had earned that title in ways I never did. The moment it hit me, there are certain moments in life that change you forever. For me, that moment came on a rainy autumn evening, 20 years after I had left Anna. It was my son's birthday. He was turning 30. I had been invited, of course. Anna had always made sure I was included in family events, even when I didn't deserve it. But as I arrived at the restaurant, I realized something. I wasn't part of this family anymore. I was an outsider. I watched from across the room as Mark laughed with my son, the two of them clinking their glasses together in celebration. I saw the way my daughter leaned on him, the way she looked at him with the kind of trust and admiration that should have been reserved for me. And then I looked at Anna. She was smiling, happy, content in a way she had never been with me. And that's when it hit me. I had spent years resenting Mark, believing he had taken my place. But the truth? I had given it to him, and I could never take it back. The unspoken words. That night, as the party was winding down, I found myself standing outside in the cold, watching the rain drizzle against the pavement. I heard footsteps behind me. When I turned, Anna was there. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, she sighed. "You look tired, David." I let out a dry chuckle. That's what happens when you spend your life regretting things. She didn't respond right away, just crossed her arms, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. And then she said something that nearly broke me. "I forgave you a long time ago." I swallowed hard. "Then why does it still feel like I lost everything?" Her eyes softened. "Because you never forgave yourself. A lifetime too late." I wanted to tell her then. Tell her how sorry I was. Tell her that not a day had passed where I didn't wish I could go back and undo everything. But what good would it have done? She had moved on. She had built a life without me. And I was just a ghost, haunting the edges of a world I no longer belonged to. So instead, I just nodded. And for the first time in years, I let myself cry. Not for her, not for my children, but for the man I could have been. and the life I would never have. Regret is a funny thing. It doesn't hit you all at once. It seeps into the quiet moments, the spaces in between, the times when you least expect it. For years, I told myself that I had accepted my fate, that I had made peace with the choices I had made. But the truth is, I never really let go. Because how can you move on when you know that you were supposed to live a different life? An invitation I didn't deserve. Years passed and life went on. My children grew older, started families of their own. I was invited to the important moments, birthdays, graduations, weddings, but I was never at the center of them. I was always on the sidelines. I convinced myself I was lucky to be included at all, that I should be grateful Anna never turned our children against me. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was a guest in my own family. The moment that drove it home was the day my grandson was born. Sophie called me, her voice filled with excitement. "Dad, I had the baby." My heart swelled. For a moment, I felt like I was part of something again. And then she said, "Mark's with me now, but you can come visit tomorrow." Mark's with me now. Not me. Not her real father. Him. And that was when I knew, no matter how much time passed, no matter how many years went by, I had lost them. The man I should have been. I still remember the first time I met Mark. It was at one of Daniel's soccer games. He was 12 and Anna had invited me to come watch. I had been nervous, expecting awkwardness, tension. But Mark, he greeted me with a handshake and a smile, treated me like I still mattered. That almost made it worse, because if he had been arrogant or rude or dismissive, I could have hated him. I could have blamed him. But he wasn't. He was the kind of man I should have been. He showed up. He stayed. He loved Anna the way I should have. He was everything I threw away. A conversation I'll never forget. One night, years later, I found myself alone in a quiet bar. It was the anniversary of the day I had left Anna. I never forgot the date. I was nursing a drink, staring at the amber liquid swirling in my glass, when I heard someone sit down next to me. I turned and my stomach dropped. It was Mark. Of all the places, of all the nights, he had ended up here. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. Then he sighed. "Anna told me once that you still love her." I tensed. "I'll always love her." He nodded, took a sip of his beer. "I believe that." I waited for him to say more, for him to tell me I had no right, that I didn't deserve to love her after what I had done. But he didn't. Instead, he looked at me with something that almost resembled pity. "Why did you do it?" he asked. I exhaled slowly, setting my glass down. "I wish I had a good answer." "Try me." I swallowed hard. "Because I was a coward." Mark studied me for a moment. Then he nodded. "Yeah, I think that's about right." I let out a dry, humorless laugh. "You're a better man than I am." "I know," he said simply. And somehow that hurt more than anything else. A life half-lived. As the years went on, I became more of a spectator in my own story. I watched my children raise families. I watched Anna grow older. I watched as the life I should have had played out in front of me, always just out of reach. I celebrated holidays alone. I spent birthdays waiting for phone calls that didn't come. I made peace with the silence. And the worst part? I deserved every second of it. The final goodbye. The last time I saw Anna, she was in a hospital bed. Old, frail, but still her. Still Anna. She had been sick for a while, but no one had told me. I had to hear it from a friend. When I arrived, Mark was sitting by her side, holding her hand. He didn't leave when I walked in. Instead, he gave me a small nod, then gently placed Anna's hand in mine before stepping out of the room. Her eyes fluttered open, and when she saw me, she smiled. "David," she whispered. I swallowed hard, squeezing her fingers. "Hey, Anna." She studied me for a long moment, her eyes soft. "You look tired." I let out a shaky laugh. "So do you." She smiled. "You know, I never hated you." Tears burned in my eyes. "I know." She sighed, closing her eyes for a moment. "We had a good life, didn't we?" I shook my head. "You did. I just watched." She opened her eyes again, and for a brief moment, I saw a glimmer of the woman I had once loved. The woman who had once loved me. "You could have had it too," she said softly. And then she squeezed my hand one last time and let go. A life without her. She was buried on a sunny afternoon, surrounded by family and friends. I stood in the back, watching as Mark held her children. Our children. I didn't belong there. Not really. And as I turned to leave, I heard a voice call my name. I looked up to see Sophie, my daughter. For the first time in years, she hugged me, and I broke down, because in that moment, I realized something terrible. I had spent my entire life mourning a woman who had already let me go, and now she was gone forever, and all I had left were the pieces of a life I never lived. Regret isn't loud. It doesn't scream in your ears or claw at your chest. It whispers. It follows you in the quiet moments, when you're alone with your thoughts. It sits beside you in the empty spaces of your life, in the chair across the table, in the bed that's too big for just one person. I've lived with that whisper for decades, and now, in the silence after Anna's passing, it's the only voice I hear, the funeral that wasn't mine to mourn. Anna's funeral was a beautiful ceremony. People spoke about her kindness, her laughter, the way she made everyone feel at home. I listened, standing in the back, feeling like an intruder in a place that once belonged to me. Mark was in the front row, my children beside him. I had no right to feel jealous. No right to feel like I had lost something because I had lost Anna a long time ago. I had no one to blame but myself. After the service, people gathered outside, sharing memories of her. I stayed back. I had nothing to offer. No stories that weren't decades old. No recent moments to hold on to. I was just a man grieving a woman who had stopped being mine years ago. And then Sophie found me. A second chance at fatherhood? She stood in front of me, hesitant, as if she wasn't sure whether she should speak. "Hey, Dad," she finally said. I swallowed hard. "Hey, sweetheart." We hadn't talked much in years. Not because she had cut me off, but because I had let the distance grow. She studied me for a long moment. "You okay?" I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell her I was fine, that I had made peace with everything. But instead I whispered, "No." Her expression softened, and she reached out, touching my arm. "You should come by sometime," she said quietly. "Meet your grandchildren." I blinked, taken aback. "You'd want that." She hesitated, then nodded. "I think Mom would have wanted that too." And just like that, something cracked open inside me. Maybe I had lost Anna forever. But maybe, just maybe, I hadn't lost everything. Trying to make amends. The first time I visited Sophie's home, I felt like a stranger. Her children, my grandchildren, looked at me with curiosity but not recognition. I was just a man their mother called Dad. I had no one to blame but myself. But I stayed. I listened to their stories, watched them play, let them ask questions about a past they had never been part of. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had something to live for. It wasn't the life I should have had. But maybe it was the second chance I didn't deserve. A visit from the past. One evening, months after the funeral, I got an unexpected visitor. It was Mark. For a moment we just stood there, staring at each other. Then he sighed. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, motioning him in. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten so many meals alone. "I wanted to say something," Mark began, clearing his throat. "About Anna." I stiffened. "Okay." He looked down at his hands. "She never stopped caring about you, you know?" I swallowed hard. "She moved on." "Yeah, but that doesn't mean she stopped caring." I didn't know what to say to that. Mark exhaled. "She used to worry about you, wonder if you were okay." She never said it out loud, but I could see it in her eyes. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting that sink in. She had still thought of me, even after everything, even after I had ruined us. She had still wondered if I was okay. And that was almost harder to bear than if she had hated me. Mark stood up. "I thought you should know." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. As he reached the door, he hesitated. "You still have time, you know," he said quietly. I frowned. "Time for what?" He gave me a small, knowing smile. to stop being a ghost. And then he left, leaving me with the weight of those words, the regret that never leaves. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself. I don't know if I'll ever stop wondering about the life I should have had. But for the first time in years, I'm trying. I see my grandchildren now. I answer when my son calls. I let myself exist in the world, instead of just watching from the outside. It's not enough to erase the past. But maybe, just maybe, it's enough to make peace with it. They say redemption is for the living. That as long as you're breathing, there's still time to make things right. But what if some mistakes can't be undone? What if some regrets never fade, no matter how hard you try to bury them? I have spent most of my life living in the past, haunted by the choices I made, the love I threw away, the family I abandoned. And now, as I stand at the end of my journey, I wonder, did I ever truly move forward? Or have I simply been waiting for the past to catch up with me? A man alone. I am old now. The years have crept up on me, stealing the strength from my bones, the color from my hair. I live in a small apartment, filled with relics of a life I never truly lived. Photos of my children as kids, long-forgotten birthday cards, an old wedding picture of Anna and me that I could never bring myself to throw away. I look at that photo often. Sometimes I talk to it. I tell her I'm sorry, that I never stopped loving her, that I wish I had been stronger, wiser, better. The picture never answers. But I swear, sometimes I can still hear her voice in the back of my mind, laughing, teasing me, telling me to get out of my head and just live. I wish I had listened to her more when she was alive. A visitor from the future. One afternoon, as I was sitting alone, staring out the window at a world that had long since moved on without me, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I saw my grandson standing there. He was 19 now, almost a man. "Hey, Grandpa," he said, shifting awkwardly. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, letting him in, still trying to wrap my head around the fact that he had come to see me at all. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten countless meals alone. For a while, he didn't say anything, just looked around, taking in the loneliness of my home. Then he met my eyes. "Mom told me about you," he said finally. I swallowed hard. "Oh, she told me you weren't always like this." I let out a humorless laugh. "And what am I like now?" He shrugged. "Like someone waiting for something that's never gonna happen." His words hit me harder than I expected. I looked away, staring at my hands. "Maybe I am." He studied me for a moment, then leaned forward. "Why did you leave her?" he asked. It was such a simple question. And yet, after all these years, I still didn't have a good answer. "I was a fool," I admitted. "I thought the grass was greener somewhere else. I thought I deserved more. And by the time I realized what I had, it was too late." He nodded slowly, as if processing my words. Then he sighed. "You know, Mom still loved you, even after everything." I felt my throat tighten. "She told you that?" He shook his head. "She didn't have to. I could see it." I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply. Even after all these years, even after everything I had done, the thought that Anna had still carried even the smallest piece of love for me was enough to break me all over again. When I finally opened my eyes, my grandson was watching me carefully. "Don't waste the time you have left, Grandpa," he said softly. "We don't have forever." Letting go. The day I finally visited Anna's grave, the sky was gray, the wind carrying the crisp scent of autumn leaves. I stood there for a long time, staring at the name engraved in stone. Anna Carter, not Anna Miller. She had let go of my name a long time ago. I just never let go of her. I knelt down, running my fingers over the cold marble. "I'm sorry," I whispered. The wind rustled through the trees, as if carrying my words away. "I loved you," I said, my voice breaking. I never stopped. I closed my eyes, swallowing back the years of regret, the lifetime of missed chances, of unspoken words. And for the first time in decades, I allowed myself to truly say goodbye, not just to her, but to the ghost of the life I had lost. A different ending. I wish I could tell you I got my happy ending. that I reconnected with my family, that I found peace, that I finally forgave myself. But some wounds never fully heal. I still live with the regret. I still dream of Anna. I still wake up some nights, reaching for a woman who isn't there. But I try. I see my grandchildren more now. I listen to their stories, laugh at their jokes, let them pull me into their world. It's not the life I should have had, but it's the life I have left. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.